Hello and welcome to Last Mixtape. My name is Stephen White, and on this week's show, we turn our lens to the recent Róisín Murphy controversy and the fragility of allyship. But first,
it's the huge amount of work to be done socially and culturally, and the gap between where we are now and I imagine where we could be, and the places that our imaginations can take us are so far away from what we're presented with a lot of the time. So I can't get too excited about anything happening now. I'm really excited about what should be happening in the future, what I hope for.
not my words, but the words of Sophie. Why, dear listener, and indeed, dear viewer, were we just listening to the words of the late, great music producer and artist Sophie at the beginning of this week's show? Well, this week I thought we'd delve into Róisín Murphy's recent comments about the trans community and how they ask a difficult question about accountability, allyship, what it means to take away from a community that gave you so much. At the beginning of this week's show, I do want to point out I am not a member of the LGBTQ plus community, so I will be linking to articles and pieces written by people from that community about this very subject. This will be very much a delve into the culture from an outside perspective, and I want to keep that in mind before we start the show. Let's dive in. Róisín Murphy was a cult icon. The voice behind Maloko's dance floor filler Sing It Back, Murphy emerged as an artist who blurred the lines between disco and performance art, writing it somewhere on the cusp of irony and sincerity. Her solo work, from the avant-garde pop beginnings of a Ruby Blue to the high stylisation of Róisín Machine, crafted their own version of the mainstream, tangential to the charts and singular to Murphy's persona. Part pop star, part avant-garde provocateur, she built a world that equals part glitter and grit, finding its home in the queer clubs of London, Dublin and Berlin. And Murphy was acutely aware of this rising gay icon status, commenting on the Irish Times in 2020 that, "If I want to be famous, I can just go to a gay club." In 2018, she said to The Guardian, "Realising I became a gay icon felt like home." And she wasn't wrong. In those spaces, Róisín Murphy was royalty. Her sound, her style, her freedom mirrored what the queer scene was built on, a safe space for expression and self-creation without permission. Her art thrived on the same defiance, the same shimmer of survival that had always lived in queer culture. Every generation has its queer icons, artists who give sound to the feeling of being othered and in doing so make it beautiful. Grace Jones, Madonna, Kylie, Gaga, Sophie, each one embraced by a community that saw itself reflected in their self-rebellion. On a lesser scale, Róisín Murphy belonged in that lineage, an artist whose live shows embraced eccentricity as excessive elegance, and the music made dance floors feel flamboyant. Between Murphy and her audience, there was a shared language of glamour, absurdity and freedom. That's what makes what came next so hard to reconcile. How someone so deeply woven into the LGBTQ plus community and whose art borrowed so much from queer culture could speak words that cut through the heart of it. The first red flags appeared in 2023. Private Facebook comments surfaced of Róisín writing that puberty blockers are fucked and that little mixed up kids needed to be protected. Within hours, the screenshots spread across social media like wildfire. She apologised publicly, maybe even awkwardly, saying she was so sorry for the hurt she caused and that she'd bow out of this conversation entirely. And for a while, she did. For trans fans, those words weren't just a difference in opinion or a matter of discussion. They were the same dangerous talking points used by Terfs or trans exclusionary radical feminists, an ideology embraced by right-wing conservatives that othered and diminished the trans experience into recycled soundbites and podcast fodder, all designed to exclude and divide. A reminder that even in a space built on inclusion, to many like Róisín Murphy, their identities were still out of their control and up for debate. For others, it was disappointing. The idea that someone who owed so much of their career to queer culture could so easily echo the rhetoric used to diminish it. Now, 2 years later, the silence was broken and Róisín Murphy returned to the conversation that she said she'd left. On X, formerly Twitter, Róisín shared a chart attributed to Tufts University's cooperative election study, claiming that the number of 18 to 22-year-olds identifying as trans or non-binary had dropped precipitously. She wrote, "It was never real. Terrible sad though. Absolute havoc wreaked on children, families and societies." When users and academics such as Professor Jean Tweenig replied that such a drop could be due to a multitude of reasons, including fear due to worsening social conditions for trans people, Murphy doubled down, commenting, "I think you mean when dissenting voices are heard." The backlash was immediate. American DJ The Blessed Madonna told Murphy to go fuck herself, and fellow fans, artists and critics all asked the same question. Why post something like that? The data she shared has been disputed. The interpretation has been led to be misleading. But in the end, the damage was done. For the people hurt, the message was absolutely clear. And for queer and trans fans who once saw her as one of their own, the message was all too familiar. Murphy, like so many before her, had dismissed their reality, their very identity, as never real. I think for me, what is so heartbreaking about all of this is not just what Róisín Murphy said in her tweets and has said in her tweets in the past. It is about who has said it. For many people in the trans and queer community, they have had their lives and their very identities be something of a political football used by insidious Joe Rogan types sitting down with equally insidious people, speaking about the right for trans people to identify how they feel and how they want, in a conversation where they are not included in it. That their very lives, how they identify, how they feel, how they want to express themselves is a matter for debate by others and something that can be imposed by others on them. The way that Róisín Murphy in that tweet says, "It was never real," has to be heartbreaking for people in that community who themselves saw maybe something in themselves in Róisín Murphy when she performed, when she played, the kind of the freedom and expression, and maybe thought to themselves that this was an artist that understood him. That is a betrayal. That is a betrayal of those people, to know that on stage when that person was performing, that sort of thinking was in their head. I don't know what's in Róisín Murphy's thoughts, and I don't know how she feels completely about the trans community, but what she has said and what she has shared and the talking points she has shared all speak to that of somebody who does not have their emotions and does not have their feelings and does not consider them as to be worthy of being part of a conversation, rather to be dismissed as kids or as children in a kind of dismissive way. Somebody who's performed music, and culture is such a strong part of this. When you take something from culture, when you become a part of another culture, when you embrace it, when you use it and you speak about it as something that is almost a commodification, it is part of your artistic, identity. She has often said that she is a queer icon, that she can walk into, as I say, into a queer bar or a gay bar and become famous. She was acutely aware of how that community took her in and how it lifted her up and in a lot of ways had maintained her career. So in order to take so much from that community and only to sweep the legs from underneath it and say what she has said, to say that people belonging to that community, some people who are at probably most risk in a lot of ways, who feel so in danger to express themselves because of that political football that their lives have become, for someone that they trusted, who they let into their community, who they saw as a part of it, as a friend, as an ally, to turn around and say those things is absolutely heartbreaking. And it is just what I would say is a clear example of cultural appropriation. You appropriated many aspects of that community, of those people, and then turned around and said, you don't exist, or you are not real, or what you decided isn't real, or what you decided is up for debate about its veracity and its reality. Music and art spaces and culture is where so many of us find our comfort, whether it is expression, whether it is sadness, it is joy, it is melancholia, it is escapism. In a lot of ways, lots of queer clubs became all of those things for all those people who outside on the street for various reasons did not feel safe, but within a community they did. So to know that somebody stepped into that community and walked away from it and said those things so socially, so out there, is absolutely beyond the pale. Quite striking that an artist as respected as Róisín Murphy is, and she's an incredibly respected artist who has a great legacy of music behind her and performance behind her, would do this says something about society as a whole. What it says is that there is an impunity. There's at least a feeling of impunity, and there's a feeling of the ability and the space almost to punch down on people who've already been punched down so much, and who are already sick of so many thought pieces about themselves, including this piece. As I say, I'm not a member of the queer community, and I'm not trans, and I'm not for a second deciding to speak for those people. What I am commenting on, or I'm trying to do commentary on here, is basically speak of the cultural appropriation and the betrayal of an artist using so many aspects of a scene, so many aspects of art, and not giving back, in fact taking away and damaging it. It says something in a far wider context, and something we're seeing in both the musical, artistic and political world. On a lot of occasions I spoke about art as the fruit on the tree of society, and what comes out in that art is what comes through the tree and what comes through the roots, and that can be bad things. We must always face into bad art, we must always face into bad artists and bad actors, because it says something about us. They are not an anomaly, and when anything shows in the fruit of music, that means there is a systemic and societal issue that we should all be aware of. A rotten fruit does bear from the poison tree. So this is an incredibly heartbreaking thing. It's a heartbreaking thing to witness that somebody who would not be seen as one of those right-wing lunatics like a Joe Rogan, or those people who straw man the trans experience on his podcast, or people like that, Jordan Peterson, all those awful fucking people, that they have insidiously made their way, and that ideology has insidiously made its way into artists and into how artists express themselves, even if it's not just through music, even if it is through their social media. Death of an author is a very complex thing, and I've tried to tackle it here before on the last mixtape, not in such a great way, but I've tried to talk about it before. But when you talk about death of the artist, one of the things that I always think is one of the most important things is, what does their art say about the thing that they are speaking about? What does their art say about the very thing that they express? The thing about Róisín Murphy is that her art is so ingrained and so entwined with them LGBTQ plus and gay clubs and queer and trans community, that it is inseparable from what she has said and what she has expressed. She has turned her back on the very thing and the very art and the very music and the very community and the very culture that has embraced her and that has informed her and has made its way into her music. For me, that is very much hard to separate. You cannot in that way separate the art from the artist, because you know what the artist thinks. Also, the artist is very much alive and still able to express even more things. Now, that's not to say that Róisín Murphy may not turn around and be educated more and maybe speak to more trans people about what she has said, and maybe turn around and say, you know what, actually I'm completely wrong. I don't know if that's going to happen, but there's always scope for that. But I do believe that at this moment that those two things are rightfully inseparable, and that people have every right to turn around and go, absolutely not. It is an important thing to take note of. This one, when it comes to death of the author, because Róisín Murphy is continuing to say these things, they are very current, and makes art, ingrains itself in the very thing that she is critiquing. At some point, every artist who builds their name within a community faces a choice to either listen to it or speak over it. That's what the Róisín Murphy controversy reveals. How fragile the bond between artist and audience can be when built upon sand. From queer and trans fans, this was about an ongoing pattern that transcends art. A societal creep where trans culture and identity is co-opted for the benefit of others, while those doing so question the validity of both. Murphy's story, at least for now, feels like a lesson in what happens when an artist mistakes adoration for absolution. Hers is not a story of cancellation, it's a story of consequences. Art isn't grown independently. Regardless of its end result, it's a fruit tangentially grown from the branches of a community that draws life from the cultural roots of experience. And Róisín Murphy's actions are felt from root to stem. It's important to recognise that this rot exposes that allyship isn't an aesthetic. It carries a deep responsibility, a social contract that Róisín Murphy betrayed by sharing those tweets and sharing that chart. The community that once gave Róisín Murphy a stage has every right to protect itself, and every right to exist long after Murphy's music fades away. In the aftermath, the silence in those clubs that once sang her song will tell you everything. So it goes, and there it went. But what do you think? What do you think about Róisín Murphy's current comments and her previous comments on the trans community? Are you a fan of Róisín Murphy's? Has this affected you? Has this not affected you? Do you still listen to her music? Can you still listen to her music? Has this changed your perspective on her art? Comment below, let me know. And as always, thank you very much for watching The Last Mixtape. And if you could please like and subscribe, that would be a great help to the channel. And thank you for everyone who supported The Last Mixtape over the last year. See you next week.
I guess I didn't realize, coming from this more underground background, that so many things that I was doing, so many people at that time, this is not that long ago, we're talking like 2012, 2013, like when I started, so many things about me people saw as taboo, like wildly taboo. And it's been quite amazing watching this, acceleration point happen within our culture, where in the time that I have had a career, Obama in America, passed, legalized gay marriage, and so many conversations around gender and sexuality and intersectionality have, if they haven't been mainstreamed, they're definitely now more in the wider vernacular, you know what I mean? Living the twists and turns that society has taken. It's been kind of wild because it's kind of like I have felt like society in so many ways has been, playing this game of catch up with me and the things that, I believe and internalized and, put into my art and put into my music.